Welcome to this edition of LEX 18's Digital Conversation. I'm Dia Davidson. As we approach this Veterans Day, the Fayette County Cooperative Extension Service is offering an event that honors the service and sacrifice of our veterans in a very unique and special way. Joining me now is Nancy Ken. She's the Regional Director of Quilts of Valor, and David Brown is a retired veteran serving the Navy. Welcome.
Not retired, but...
Retired, yes, yes, indeed. Well, we want to first thank you, sir, for your service.
Well, you're very welcome.
Yes, and Nancy, thank you for doing something like this to highlight and to honor in such a unique way. Who would have thought a quilt?
My passion, my pleasure.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about how it all got started.
Back in 2003, a woman, Catherine Roberts, had a son who deployed to Iraq. Mm-hmm. And as quilters do, she was a quilter, as quilters do, she's anxious about her son being there. Sure. This seed came to her in a dream one night. And as the dream played out, quilters know quilts are comfort, quilts are healing, quilts are loving. And she saw this vision of this recently deployed warrior, troubled, buried in his woes, in his worries. And like turning the pages in a book, the next vision she saw was this warrior wrapped in a quilt, demons gone, and there was just a tranquility in the room. And that indeed was the seed that planted Quilts of Valor Foundation.
Well, Mr. Brown, you were wrapped in one of these quilts, weren't
Indeed.
you? Let's talk a little bit about the experience for you. What was it like to be honored in such a special and unique way?
Well, for me, it was a particularly poignant moment because I was in my hometown. I was in a room with veterans from World War II, Korean War, Vietnam era veterans, Middle Eastern of the various genre. We're all there. There were old men in wheelchairs. There were young ladies with seeing eye dogs. There were all kinds of veterans there. And none of us felt like we deserved to be selected to be given a quilt. But when they wrap that quilt around you, there's such an unbelievable warmth that comes to you. In my instance, the ladies that made my quilt had traveled from Oregon to Western Kentucky to present my quilt.
Had you ever met them before?
Never, had no idea. I walked into an exhibit of beautiful quilts, and it turned into a love fest, basically.
Wow. How do you select the veterans?
We don't select veterans. It is our profound belief, although, as David said, many veterans will tell you they don't feel like they deserve a quilt. We know and we understand that when you sign that contract that promises to protect and defend the United States against all enemies,
foreign and domestic,
we know that you have made a commitment. Yes. And so whether you served in the United States or on another foreign shore, not necessarily on a war line. Mm-hmm. You have done your job and your part, and you truly have been touched by war.
Oh, indeed.
And so there's not a selection process, there's just a request.
So then how do people go about nominating or requesting?
Quilts of Valor Foundation has a website. Okay. You may go to the website. There's a drop-down menu that says request a quilt, and there's a series of information that needs to be filled out. You can request a quilt for yourself, or you can request a quilt for a family member, for a veteran that you know. The things that you need to know when you go on there is the spelling, the branch of service, the years that he served, and then there's an opportunity to make comments. If there's something special you want us to know about your veteran, you have an opportunity.
What about a deceased veteran? Because, quite frankly, we're losing a lot of our older World War II veterans. Some now it's moving into the Vietnam era and Korean era. How can we keep their memories and their service alive with this?
We are highly motivated to award Quilts of Valor to all veterans during their lifetime. Quilts of Valor are awarded to the living, although we are ever mindful of those that have been killed in action or are missing in action. Quilts of Valor are to the living, and that Quilt of Valor becomes a legacy to his family when he passes on.
Indeed.
Could I speak to that?
Sure.
Because that's a part of what goes through the veterans when these things are wrapped around your shoulders.
Yeah.
It goes beyond being a quilt. It goes beyond being a tribute to your service. It speaks to the universal brotherhood of service, and it also speaks to the inability to accept that you're deserving, but you know that someone passed that didn't, and they perhaps were lost and never came home. Right. All sorts of dreadful and heartbreaking scenarios that we can represent and honor those men and women. So, and I think most of the guys that I know, first thing I did when I got home from being given my quilt was got online and nominated the crew from my Radio Shack from the ship I was on.
Wow.
And I also nominated friends who I'd grown up with who had served. And many of those guys have gotten their quilts now, and they've all told me when they found out they were getting quilt, they didn't deserve it. All they did was do their job. And they told me after they got it, they'd never been through such an emotional experience in their life, and they appreciated it so much. And I think part of it is because we do understand that so many don't get to come home. So many can't be honored in another way. I have a very close friend who plays taps at military funerals, and he's expressed many of the same feelings, that it's something I can do to honor those who can't.
Yes, indeed. And that's the beauty, if you will, about all branches of the military. There seems to be this brotherhood and sisterhood bond that is just unbreakable.
Absolutely true.
Well, let's talk a little bit about how you go about designing these quilts, because they are each unique. We are seeing some of the video. They're beautifully done.
Every quilt is different. We may use the same pattern 6 or 7 times, but we'll never use the same fabric in that pattern. So each veteran that receives a Quilt of Valor is getting a unique and special quilt made just for him or her.
Oh my. Do you research the veteran, or is this just something that is just heartfelt by the quilter?
There is just a love of the quilters to honor the veterans. As we are sewing these quilts, we are thinking about the veteran, and not David in specific.
Right.
We are thinking about the veteran. We are thinking about the time they served. We're thinking about what they gave, being away from their family, doing the pieces that they need to do for service. Sometimes I sit and sew and I cry, because it's not a fear, it's not a sadness, it's a joy of being able to say thank you in a way that I can.
Right.
He did his job. This is my job.
Wow. Wow.
I have an army of quilters, if you will.
All across the United States?
They are Quilts of Valor Foundation is a nationwide organization. Yes. And there is an army of quilters when we go, you know, how do they break down platoons or whatever? But we have a group here. We have 10 quilting groups in Kentucky. Okay. And there's a great joy to that, and there's kind of a sadness to that, because 10 doesn't come close to helping us meet the needs that we have. Sure.
Are you looking for more quilters? Because if somebody's out there who likes to do that, can they get in touch with you through the website?
They surely can get in touch with me through the website. We are always looking for quilters. Our quilt group meets at the Fayette County Extension Office on the 3rd Wednesday of every month. Okay. We're not meeting November because it's the day before Thanksgiving, and December it's just a few days before Christmas.
Sure, sure.
But we meet the 3rd Wednesday, and we welcome sewers of all skill levels. We are there's enough of us there. We're happy to sew. We're happy to teach. And if you don't want to sew, but you want to press, or there's always a job for people to do.
Mr. Brown, have you learned how to sew a quilt?
No.
No. The short answer is no.
I will say I'm an artist by life choice, by designation from a childhood, I guess.
Right.
But I appreciate the design process, but I've never gotten into the sewing. But I did design magazine pages for the Quilters magazine for a number of years as a freelance job, so I'm very familiar with the work and the principles that are involved. I don't put my hands on it.
You can't put the finger to the needle, huh? Okay. Now, there's a book, Quilts of Valor. Let's talk a little bit about that, and can people purchase that?
Thank you. This actually is the first ever Quilts of Valor published book. It has just recently been published in the last couple of months. Okay. In this book is represented a quilt from each state. So state coordinators in each state submitted a cluster of 2 or 3 quilts. Okay. The I want to say the committee chose the quilts that would be represented in the book.
And that's Kentucky's hanging up there.
This is Kentucky's hanging up there. This is the one that was submitted for Kentucky. These quilts right now, all 50 that are represented in the book, are currently on a tour with AQS, American Quilting Society, at their shows, their quilt shows across the United States. They will end their tour at the National Quilt Museum in Paducah, and these quilts that are represented in this book will be awarded on Veterans Day or near Veterans Day in Paducah in 2019.
Wow. Now we have an event that's coming up tomorrow, right?
Tomorrow night,
okay,
that's
let's
correct.
talk a little bit about that and how can people come out who are interested in coming out and supporting?
Okay, so I will say that Quilts of Valor there are many ways in which they're awarded. Sometimes they are awarded in groups, sometimes they're awarded in very private settings, sometimes veterans are uncomfortable or their experiences just make it impossible for them to be able to be in a group setting. Annually, the Fayette County Extension Office, one of our partners, they sponsor our show days and they sponsor this event. And so tomorrow evening, 6 o'clock, they're providing a dinner for the veterans and their families. And then post-dinner, we will have an award ceremony, and we have 14 veterans being honored this year at the Extension Office.
Mr. Brown, what is the one thing, if you were able to share or tell, especially our younger people, what is it to serve in such a selfless way? What does it mean? What does it do? What does it feel like to you? And why would you suggest or encourage a young person to want to do that type of service?
Well, the quick, glib answer is that I wouldn't do it again at gunpoint, and you'd have to take my life to take it away from me, because it means that much to you.
Sure.
It wasn't pleasant.
No.
It wasn't something that I enjoyed doing so much, as we found ways of having joy within our brotherhood, doing the things that we were self-professed miserable doing.
Right.
But we knew that it was for a greater cause. We knew that we were doing it to have one another's backs, the common cliche. It wasn't so much that we had one another's backs, we had one another's hearts.
Yes.
And we keep those hearts. And that's the thing that young people will never understand until it's history in their own lives, is that you go in as an individual walking around in your underwear, being insulted, being trained to do a job, doing that job, and when you get out, you look back and you may have some skills, you may have some weathering as an individual, but you have brothers and sisters that you will love for the rest of your life. And beyond the service to the country, beyond the protection of freedom, but beyond the institutional patriotism that goes with it, it's a very personal thing.
Yes.
I love Thumper, I love Flash, I love Chink, I love all those brothers that I served with. It's in your heart more so than it is on your resume or in your mailbox when you get, solicitations or whatever for veterans or a discount at a store or something. That's all superficial. Right. Where it lives is in your heart and in your satisfaction that you did your part when it was your time, and you can feel proud about that. And for people like Nancy and all of her friends who are out there making quilts, they do it from their hearts. I know I had a phone call from a high school classmate who lives in Rochester, Minnesota, who is a Quilt of Valor quilter. And she knew of my friend who plays taps, and she wanted to know if Larry had gotten the quilt. She wanted to give him a quilt she had made. I said, yes, I'm very happy to say I was there today. Larry got his quilt, but there are other classmates who haven't, that I've nominated. She says, well, let's get my quilt to one of them. So one of our classmates got a quilt made by another classmate, hadn't seen it in 55 years, but because of that bond. And then he was just like the rest of us. I didn't do anything to get a quilt. I just did what they told me to do, kind of a thing. And then after he got it, he called me crying, telling me about the experience of the ladies coming and giving him his quilt in his home and wrapping him with that quilt. And so it's something that Quilt of Valor is doing something for basically old men and women in most instances. I don't know what the average age is of these people that get the quilts, but in my experience, the ones I've seen are guys that have been out of the service for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And it is a confirmation of what they already know, but it's never been said to them, and I think that's very important.
Don't call yourself old, just call yourself wise, weathered, seasoned,
well,
you know?
We still live and we still make mistakes, so it's a little bit humbling to say that you're wise, but, but it is a way of, I know for me, I was very eager to nominate my shipmates.
Yes.
And to see that, and Nancy's been very helpful in working with me to see that those guys get their quilts, and I appreciate it. I have a shipmate who is in very poor health, and she's working very hard to help him get his quilt while he can, and I appreciate that.
It's very difficult not to feel the love in your heart for these men and women who are so humble about the service that they provided. And again, many of our young people haven't experienced enough to know. They don't understand, but
it is so appreciated.
Well, I'm happy to say that I have a grandson who's just gone back into the service. He's joined the Army after a 5-year hitch in the Marine Corps. And I'm going to nominate him, even though he's active duty, and active duty are available, are eligible to receive these.
They are.
And he's going to be nominated before the day's over. So I hadn't thought about it before I started talking with you about my grandson being in the service, but there is a young veteran, and they're out there. There are teenagers who are in the service today who could get a Quilt of Valor for that part.
And they help us be able to sleep well at night,
Ain't it the
to know
truth?
that we're
Ain't it
safe.
the truth?
Indeed. Thank you both so very much. Happy Veterans Day.
Thank you.
To you. Happy Veterans Day to you, and to you as well. And thank you so much for watching this digital conversation. You can find more digital conversations on LEX18.com. Until next time.